cold marble floors should never touch the knees of a pregnant Omega. When billionaire Nathaniel Cross stepped out of his private elevator, he expected quarterly reports. Instead, he found the man who vanished from his bed 6 months ago, scrubbing spills while ruthless management laughed. Then hell broke loose. Nathaniel Cross, CEO of Vanguard Holdings, built his international empire on precision, unyielding standards, and an absolute lack of sentimentality. As a prime alpha, his instincts were razor-sharp, wired for dominance in both the cutthroat boardroom and the complex hierarchy of Seattle's corporate elite. He demanded perfection from his executives, his rivals, and himself. For the last 6 months, his company had run with cold, terrifying efficiency. But beneath the tailored Italian suits and the icy, untouchable exterior, Nathaniel was a man haunted by a phantom. 6 months ago, Oliver Hayes had vanished from his life without a trace. Oliver, with his quiet brilliance, soft smiles, and a natural scent like petrichor and crushed mint, had been a junior data analyst in the acquisitions department. He had also been the only Omega to ever slip past Nathaniel's ironclad defenses. Their relationship had been an intensely guarded secret, an intoxicating whirlwind of stolen moments in locked executive suites and tangled, scent-drenched sheets in Nathaniel's penthouse. Oliver grounded the alpha, softening his edges while matching his intellect. Then, one bleak Tuesday morning, Nathaniel woke to a cold bed and a brief, clinically typed resignation letter resting on his marble kitchen island. There was no explanation, no forwarding address. Oliver's phone was disconnected by noon, and his modest apartment was completely cleared out by nightfall. Nathaniel had deployed elite private investigators, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to track the Omega down. He had tapped into financial records, lease agreements, and flight manifests, but Oliver had seemingly evaporated into thin air. The loss had triggered a dark, volatile shift in Nathaniel's alpha nature. Deprived of his mate, he became a tyrant at work, burying his unspoken grief and mounting panic under mountains of aggressive corporate acquisitions and hostile takeovers. His presence alone was enough to make senior vice presidents tremble. It was a Friday night, precisely 9:45, when the ghosts of the past violently collided with the present. Nathaniel was on the 42nd floor of the Vanguard Tower, a sprawling, glass-walled level entirely dedicated to human resources and internal operations. He had sent his assistant home hours ago, preferring the silence as he came down to personally retrieve a heavily redacted employee restructuring file. The floor was supposed to be completely empty, save for the hum of the servers and the night shift cleaning crew. Down the expansive, dimly lit hallway, hidden behind frosted glass partitions, Oliver Hayes was fighting a losing battle against his own exhausted body. He was draped in an oversized, coarse navy blue jumpsuit that belonged to Apex Facility Solutions, a third-party shell contractor utilized for cheap labor. The thick, rigid fabric was specifically chosen by Oliver to hide the undeniable swelling curve of his 6-month pregnancy. His knees throbbed agonizingly against the unforgiving imported Italian marble as he aggressively scrubbed a sticky coffee spill that had seeped deep into the grout. His bare hands, stripped of the cheap rubber gloves that had torn an hour ago, were red and blistering from the harsh industrial chemicals. Every movement sent a sharp, radiating ache through his lower back. An unsupported Omega pregnancy devoid of the sire's alpha pheromones, nesting provisions, and physical protection was a biological nightmare. His scent, once a vibrant, refreshing mint that Nathaniel used to bury his face in, was now entirely muted by cheap over-the-counter chemical suppressants and soured by chronic, unrelenting stress. Oliver paused, dropping the heavy bristle brush into the murky water of his yellow mop bucket. He rocked back onto his heels and pressed a trembling hand to his swollen stomach. A small, fluttering kick answered his touch, a brief reminder of the life growing inside him. He bit his cracked lower lip, holding back a desperate sob. He hadn't wanted this life of poverty and fear for his pup. He had loved Nathaniel. He still did, with every fractured piece of his heart. But 6 months ago, Cynthia Richards, the formidable and ruthless director of human resources at Vanguard, had discovered their secret. Cynthia had intercepted a routine employee medical screening that flagged Oliver's changing hormone levels. She had cornered Oliver in a windowless archive room, locking the door behind her. With venomous precision, she had laid out a fabricated, yet terrifyingly plausible narrative. Nathaniel was officially courting a wealthy, high-born alpha heiress from the formidable Dupont family to secure a massive European logistics merger. Cynthia told Oliver that prime alphas like Nathaniel only used lower-tier, working-class omegas for temporary biological relief. Worse, she delivered a threat that shattered Oliver's world. She warned that if Nathaniel found out about the pregnancy, the CEO would view it as a pathetic extortion attempt. He would use Vanguard's bottomless legal resources to strip Oliver of his rights, claim full custody of the alpha heir, and discard Oliver to the streets, barring him from ever seeing his child again. Terrified, hormonal, and fiercely protective of his unborn baby, Oliver had panicked and run. But Cynthia's cruelty hadn't stopped at a simple threat. To ensure Oliver never resurfaced to ruin her carefully managed corporate optics or jeopardize her own position by exposing her meddling, she had quietly flagged his social security number in the regional HR databases as a severe corporate espionage risk. Blacklisted and legally radioactive, Oliver couldn't land a single professional data analysis job in the state of Washington. With his savings rapidly draining, medical bills looming, and his belly growing, he was forced into under-the-table manual labor just to keep a roof over his head. In a sick, twisted stroke of fate, the only agency that didn't run comprehensive background checks had contracted him right back to the Vanguard Tower. He had survived the last 2 agonizing months by strictly taking the late-night shifts, praying to whatever gods were listening that the CEO never worked past 8 o'clock on a Friday. Tonight the gods were violently indifferent. "You missed a spot, Hayes," a voice sneered, the sound echoing harshly off the glass walls. Oliver flinched violently, instinctively pulling his hands away from his stomach to grip the handle of his mop. Gregory Fields, the night shift floor supervisor, stood over him. Gregory was a bitter beater who thrived on petty tyranny, particularly toward the vulnerable Omegas forced into menial labor under his watch. Standing a few feet behind Gregory was Cynthia Richards herself. She was leaning against a mahogany reception desk, arms crossed, watching the scene with a cold, amused smirk. She was working late on a compliance audit and had recognized Oliver immediately when he was assigned to her floor weeks ago. Instead of having him removed, she had decided to keep him there, relishing the opportunity to watch the former brilliant analyst reduced to scrubbing the floors she walked on. "I said you missed a spot," Gregory repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. He swirled a half-empty plastic cup of iced coffee in his hand, the ice clinking loudly in the quiet office. Before Oliver could force out an apology, Gregory deliberately tilted his wrist. The remaining dark liquid, complete with melting ice cubes, cascaded directly onto the pristine marble Oliver had just spent 10 agonizing minutes scrubbing. A few cold drops splashed onto Oliver's collarbone, soaking into the collar of his jumpsuit. "Clean it up, and do it right this time," Gregory barked, stepping closer so his polished shoes were inches from Oliver's bruised knees. "I don't know how an incompetent, bloated mess like you even managed to get hired by Apex. You move like a pregnant cow. You're lucky we even allow your kind in a building of this caliber." 2 other night shift cleaners working at the far end of the hall looked away in shame, too terrified of losing their own meager paychecks to intervene. Oliver bowed his head, fighting the humiliated tears burning his eyes. "Yes, Mr. Fields," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. He reached for the chemical-soaked sponge, his fingers trembling violently. The physical strain on his body was immense, and the baby was shifting restlessly, biologically sensing its mother's acute, overwhelming distress. Neither Gregory nor Cynthia noticed the subtle, sudden drop in the room's temperature. They didn't notice the heavy, suffocating pressure that suddenly gripped the air, making it difficult to draw full breath. But Oliver felt it. Every dormant instinct in his Omega biology flared to violent, desperate life. The cheap suppressants he wore were instantly obliterated by the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of dark mahogany, aged whiskey, and a pure, territorial alpha. Nathaniel Cross stood at the end of the corridor. The CEO had frozen in his tracks the exact moment the faint, sour scent of distressed mint reached his nose. It's impossible, his logical brain had reasoned. But his alpha biology didn't deal in impossibilities. It dealt in absolute, undeniable truths. He had stalked silently down the hallway, the shadows clinging to his tailored suit, his heart pounding against his ribs, only to stop dead at the horrifying tableau before him. His mate, his lost beloved Omega, on his knees draped in a filthy uniform, scrubbing the floor while a middle management parasite poured garbage on him. And then the second, earth-shattering realization hit. As Nathaniel stared at Oliver's profile, the oversized, rigid uniform shifted against the Omega's body. The undeniable swollen curve of a second trimester pregnancy was laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights. Nathaniel's impossibly sharp senses locked onto Oliver's scent, pushing past the chemical suppressants, the industrial bleach, and the sour fear. There it was, the rich, milky, sweet undertone of an Omega carrying a pup. His pup. Nathaniel did the math in a fraction of a second. 6 months. But time. The sound of the plastic mop bucket rattling against the floor as Oliver frantically tried to clean the fresh mess was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Step away from him. The voice didn't echo. It struck like a physical blow. It was a pure, unadulterated alpha command, laced with such lethal, crushing dominance that Gregory's knees buckled involuntarily, sending the beta crashing hard onto the wet marble. Cynthia gasped loudly, her smug expression vanishing in an instant as she clutched the edge of the desk, her face draining of all color. Oliver froze, the wet sponge slipping from his numb fingers. He couldn't breathe, his heart hammered wildly against his ribs. Slowly, terrified of the illusion breaking, he turned his head. Nathaniel was advancing down the hall, his eyes practically glowing with a predatory, possessive fury that defied human logic. The CEO didn't even look at the two terrified executives. His singular, consuming focus was the trembling Omega on the floor. And Nathaniel, Oliver breathed out, the name slipping past his lips before he could stop it. The casual use of the untouchable CEO's first name by a lowly janitor caused Gregory to stare in dumbfounded, uncomprehending horror. Nathaniel dropped to one knee right in the center of the spill, completely heedless of the dirty water soaking into his $5,000 bespoke trousers. He reached out, his large, warm hands gently gripping Oliver's trembling shoulders. The moment their skin made contact, a violent shudder ripped through Oliver's entire body. The 6 months of biological starvation, the agonizing absence of his alpha, vanished in an instant. Nathaniel's potent pheromones wrapped around him like a heavy, impenetrable shield, fiercely soothing the frantic pup in his womb. Oliver sagged forward, his strength utterly spent. "Oliver," Nathaniel choked out, his voice thick with an overwhelming emotion. No one at Vanguard Holdings had ever heard from him. He pulled the Omega flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of Oliver's neck, inhaling deeply to scent him. "You're freezing. You're trembling. God, look at your hands. What have they done to you?" "Mr. Cross." Cynthia finally found her voice, though it shook violently. She took a frantic step forward, her corporate survival instincts kicking in for a desperate attempt at damage control. "Sir, there's been a massive misunderstanding. This contractor was acting wildly insubordinate. He's a known security risk, a terminated employee who snuck back into the building under a false alias." Nathaniel's head snapped up. The tender vulnerability he had just shown his Omega vanished instantly, replaced by the terrifying, cold visage of a corporate executioner. He stood up slowly, though he kept one strong arm securely wrapped around Oliver's waist, effortlessly pulling the pregnant Omega to his feet and tucking him securely against his side. "A security risk," Nathaniel repeated, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet whisper that carried perfectly across the dead-silent floor. "You flagged his file, didn't you, Cynthia? I wondered why my private intelligence team hit a brick wall in the regional employment database. You locked his credentials." Cynthia stepped back, her breath hitching, her polished veneer cracking completely. "I was protecting the company, Nathaniel. He was trying to trap you with a pregnancy." "He's a manipulator." "Shut your mouth," Nathaniel snarled, the raw alpha command forcing her jaw to snap shut so hard her teeth clicked. You didn't protect my company. You banished my mate. You forced the Omega carrying my heir onto his bleeding knees to scrub your floors. Gregory, still sprawled on the floor, began to scramble backward like a cornered rat, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Mr. Cross, I swear to God I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was yours. It wouldn't matter if he belonged to a man sleeping on the street. Nathaniel stepped forward, his massive shadow swallowing the cowering supervisor. You abused an expectant Omega in my building, under my name. Without taking his eyes off them, Nathaniel pulled his cell phone from his inner breast pocket, hitting a speed dial number with his thumb while holding Oliver flush against his side. Holden, Nathaniel said the moment the line connected to his head of corporate security. Initiate a full lockdown on the 42nd floor. Cancel the building access and security badges for Gregory Fields and Cynthia Richards immediately. I want them physically escorted from the premises by armed guards. They are not to collect their personal belongings. They are not to touch a single computer, phone, or file. Confiscate their devices. Sir, you calmed my pension. Cynthia shrieked, the reality of her ruin setting in as tears of panic finally spilled over her perfectly applied makeup. I've been here for 10 years. Your pension is gone. Your stock options and severance packages are voided under the gross misconduct and morality clauses of your executive contracts, Nathaniel stated with absolute chilling finality. By Monday morning, my personal legal team will file civil and criminal charges against you both for workplace endangerment, harassment, and unauthorized manipulation of secure corporate files. I will personally ensure you are bankrupted by the legal fees before we even reach a courtroom. You will never work in this sector again. You are fired. He didn't wait for their hysterical begging to begin. Nathaniel took off his heavy, warm cashmere suit jacket and wrapped it tenderly around Oliver's shaking shoulders, masking the humiliating janitorial uniform and enveloping the Omega entirely in his rich, protective scent. Come on, sweetheart, Nathaniel whispered softly, turning away from the ruined executives. The ruthless CEO melted away entirely as he looked down at the father of his child, gently brushing a stray tear from Oliver's cheek. I'm taking you home. Warm air washed over Oliver as the private elevator doors parted, opening directly into the sprawling expanse of Nathaniel's penthouse. The transition from the harsh, fluorescent purgatory of the corporate tower to this quiet, opulent sanctuary was jarring. Oliver's legs finally gave out, the adrenaline crashing completely. Before his knees could hit the brushed oak floorboards, Nathaniel caught him, scooping the pregnant Omega into his arms with effortless, terrifying strength. I've got you, Nathaniel murmured, his deep voice vibrating against Oliver's chest. You're safe now. I have you. He carried Oliver straight to the master suite, bypassing the extravagant living areas to gently deposit him onto the center of the massive, custom-built king bed. The mattress was already saturated with Nathaniel's scent wood smoke, cedar, and that crisp, authoritative alpha ozone. Oliver practically melted into the sheets, his biology desperately greedily absorbing the pheromones he had been starved of for half a year. Within 20 minutes, Nathaniel's personal concierge physician, Dr. Harrison, arrived with a portable ultrasound machine and a bag full of medical supplies. Nathaniel refused to leave the room, standing like a brooding sentinel at the foot of the bed while the doctor worked. The severe stress and malnutrition have taken a toll, Dr. Harrison noted quietly, wiping the ultrasound gel from Oliver's swollen abdomen. He adjusted his glasses, looking from the monitor to the fierce alpha. However, the pup is remarkably resilient. Heartbeat is strong. But Mr. Hayes is severely iron deficient. His cortisol levels are dangerously high, and the chemical scent suppressants he's been using are toxic for expectant Omegas. He needs bed rest, a specialized high-protein diet, and constant exposure to your pheromones, Mr. Cross, to stabilize his biology. He will have everything, Nathaniel stated, his voice a low, vibrating hum that left absolutely no room for debate. Thank you, Doctor. My driver will take you home. Once they were alone, the vast silence of the penthouse settled around them. Nathaniel shed his tie and unbuttoned his collar, sitting carefully on the edge of the mattress. He reached out, his large hand gently resting on the curve of Oliver's belly. The baby, sensing the direct presence of its sire, bumped a tiny limb against Nathaniel's palm. The CEO's breath hitched, a tear finally escaping his ironclad control to trace down his sharp jawline. "Why, Oliver?" Nathaniel's voice broke, the terrifying corporate titan reduced to a pleading, desperate mate. "Why did you leave me? If you had just told me about the baby. God, why did you run?" Oliver curled onto his side, pulling the heavy down comforter up to his chin. The tears he had held back for 6 months finally spilled over, soaking into the silk pillowcases. "Cynthia," Oliver choked out, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "She found my medical file. She locked me in the archives." Nathaniel's jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. "Tell me exactly what she said." "She said you were courting the Dupont heiress," Oliver whispered, his voice trembling as the traumatic memory flooded back. "She said Prime Alphas only use working-class Omegas for temporary relief. But that wasn't why I ran, Nathaniel. I could have handled you not wanting me. I could have survived a broken heart." Oliver reached out, his raw, blistered fingers gripping Nathaniel's pristine shirt sleeve. "She told me that if you found out I was pregnant, you would think it was an extortion attempt. She said you would use Vanguard's lawyers to strip me of my parental rights. She said you would take my baby and throw me on the street, and I would never see my pup again. I was so terrified. I had no money, no power. You are Nathaniel Cross. You can buy and sell cities. How could I fight you?" A horrifying, suffocating silence filled the room. Nathaniel stared at the man he loved, the pieces of the puzzle violently snapping together. The Dupont merger was just a business deal. He had politely declined the heiress's advances months ago. But Cynthia had weaponized his wealth, his status, and his alpha biology against the most vulnerable person in his life. Nathaniel didn't rage. He didn't shout. Instead, a terrifying, absolute calm washed over him. He lay down on the bed, carefully pulling Oliver flush against his chest, wrapping his arms around the Omega and their unborn child. "I have never loved anyone but you," Nathaniel vowed, pressing his lips to the scent gland on Oliver's neck, letting his claiming scent wash over the Omega to soothe the lingering trauma. "There was no heiress. There was no temporary relief. The week you vanished, I had ordered a custom ring. I was going to ask you to officially bind to me." Oliver gasped, his eyes flying wide open as he looked up into Nathaniel's dark, intensely sincere gaze. "I will spend the rest of my life making up for the fact that my company failed to protect you," Nathaniel whispered, his thumb gently stroking Oliver's cheek. "You are going to rest, you are going to heal, and on Monday morning, I am going to burn their world to the ground." Monday morning brought a storm to the Seattle financial district, unlike anything the city had seen in a decade. Nathaniel Cross did not just fire people, he annihilated them. Over the weekend, while Oliver slept deeply, nested in a fortress of expensive blankets and alpha-scented clothing, Nathaniel had mobilized his entire legal and financial divisions. By 9 a.m., the Vanguard Holdings boardroom was a theater of execution. Sitting at the far end of the massive mahogany table was Arthur Pendleton, the smug, heavily cologned Alpha CEO of Apex Facility Solutions. He had been summoned to Vanguard under the guise of an emergency contract renegotiation. He expected a reprimand regarding the Friday night incident. He did not expect to walk into his own slaughter. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, impeccably dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, exuding a predatory aura so oppressive that the several junior lawyers in the room were visibly sweating. "Mr. Cross, I assure you the incident with the Omega cleaner on Friday was an isolated oversight," Arthur began smoothly, adjusting his silk tie. "We have already terminated the supervisor, Gregory Fields, and we are prepared to offer Vanguard a 20% discount on our quarterly contract to smooth this over." Nathaniel didn't blink. He slowly slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished table. "You aren't offering me a discount, Arthur," Nathaniel said, his voice a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "Because as of 6 a.m. this morning, you no longer own Apex Facility Solutions." Arthur's smug smile faltered. "Excuse me? That's impossible. Apex is a privately held. Apex was heavily leveraged with debt from the Horizon Bank Group, Nathaniel interrupted effortlessly. Debt that Vanguard Holdings quietly purchased over the weekend. We called the loans due at dawn. When your CFO panicked, my acquisitions team offered a buyout of your majority shareholders at a premium they couldn't refuse. I now own 82% of your company. Arthur leaped to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You can't do this. This is a hostile takeover. Over a janitor. That janitor is my mate, Nathaniel stated, the sheer territorial alpha dominance in his voice forcing Arthur to drop back into his chair, physically subdued. And he is carrying my heir. The boardroom descended into a stunned, breathless silence. But I didn't stop at buying your company, Arthur, Nathaniel continued, leaning forward, his eyes burning with a cold, relentless fire. When my auditors cracked your books open, they found a systemic, illegal pattern. Apex deliberately hires vulnerable, unbonded Omegas, strips them of their benefits by classifying them as independent contractors, and pays them below minimum wage through shell company loopholes. You exploit desperation. Nathaniel stood up, towering over the table. I have already handed the entire audit over to the Department of Labor and the federal tax authorities. Apex Facility Solutions is being dissolved today. All of your employees will be absorbed directly into Vanguard Holdings, given full benefits, comprehensive health care, and immediate raises to match union standards. Arthur turned pale, his hands trembling. You're ruining me. I am erasing you, the natural corrected coldly. Furthermore, my legal team has filed civil suits against you, Gregory Fields and Cynthia Richards. I am going to bleed you dry in court for the emotional and physical distress inflicted upon my mate. You will lose your homes, your savings, and your reputations. Security will escort you out. If I ever see your face in this city again, my lawyers will be the least of your concerns. Arthur Pendleton was escorted from the Vanguard Tower in a state of catatonic shock. Within 48 hours, the financial news networks were buzzing with the unprecedented, vicious dismantling of Apex and the complete blacklisting of Cynthia Richards and Gregory Fields from the corporate world. 3 months later, the cold, ruthless atmosphere of Vanguard Holdings had fundamentally shifted. The company had just unveiled the most comprehensive, groundbreaking parental leave and Omega care policy in the country, completely subsidized by the CEO's personal wealth. The hushed, terrified whispers of the executive floors had been replaced by a genuine, albeit cautious, respect. On the top floor, bathed in the warm, golden afternoon sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Nathaniel sat at his desk. He wasn't reviewing acquisition reports or hostile takeover plans. He was looking at the man sleeping softly on the leather sofa across the room. Oliver was glowing, wrapped in one of Nathaniel's oversized suit jackets. His belly was massive now, just weeks away from his due date. He was no longer a secret, no longer a ghost haunting the marble floors. He was officially Oliver Cross, bound and mated, fiercely protected and deeply loved. Nathaniel stood quietly, walking over to kneel beside the sofa. He didn't care about his expensive trousers anymore. He reached out, gently pressing his hand against his husband's stomach, smiling as a strong, vigorous kick greeted him. The Alpha CEO had built an empire of glass and steel. But as Oliver stirred, opening his eyes to offer a sleepy, content smile, Nathaniel knew he had finally found the only treasure worth keeping. Did this intense Omegaverse drama keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved seeing this Alpha CEO ruthlessly protect his pregnant Omega and destroy the toxic corporate villains, hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, high-stakes romance stories. Drop a comment below what was your favorite moment of Nathaniel's epic revenge.